edition of the, okay, should have said that, waited for that. For the first of the synchronization workshops for the 2024 edition. I will have to start with a little bit of an apology. I have a cough at the moment, and if I don't hit the mute button in time, I apologize. But we'll see how it goes. One advantage of that is that I'm not going to talk so much, and we have much more time to have an actual discussions later on. As Sarah said, the session is recorded. This will be for internal use only. It allows us to go back and review what was said and helps with the report writing later. There is a shared spreadsheet and note-taking document for you to take some notes from the sessions today, if you like. Maaike will be doing some of the note-taking herself as well, but please add some comments, add extra information that you have into the note-taking document. In the spreadsheet, please keep the information factual, short, and preferably try and include some links where possible. Yes, just yes, no answers. Okay, they're short and factual, but if you can provide a little bit more information, that will be really, really useful. In the note-taking document, that's where we can add more detail. And if you're adding content to the spreadsheet, please be careful when editing the spreadsheet, and please refrain from editing other people's rows in there. Even if you spot a typo, I know it's hard to leave typos in place, but you have to. Don't have to complete all of that in today's session. It would be really good if you can get as much information in and pick up on some of the discussions that have happened, add extra knowledge and information as you can. But it's possible to do this up until the 7th of November. The survey responses for those who've completed it so far have already been added to the spreadsheets. So it's fairly straightforward. If you want to add anything extra, then please do so. There's always been to be one I miss. We're particularly interested in the fairness of digital objects across the whole range, and in looking at the creation, sharing, and supporting of those. There's only 4 questions this time round. You may not have answers to all of them, but if you do have useful links and extra information, that will be great. The outcome from these workshops will be synthesized into a milestone report for the 2024 edition. This is similar to what has happened in the last 2 years. And additionally, after that, there will be a white paper that brings together all of those 3 workshops, and that will be published next March. And hopefully, and that should give everybody a good insight as to the recommendations, the thoughts, and information that's available. this year's set of questions from this session have actually come from last year's recommendations. So we have 4 basic questions that come from the recommendations from last year. I'll go into those recommendations a little bit more later when we talk about each question. So the first one is, does your project or initiative provide local support for researchers in discipline-specific or generic verification process? Then I put these 2 on one page together because they'll be picked up in one conversation starting. What is your project or initiative doing to implement discipline-specific metrics and tests? This is quite an interesting area and a developing area, and we'll discuss this a bit later as well. And does your community and repositories, all the repositories you use, publish fair implementation profile? It's part of the same question, really, or the same recommendation that came out from last year. Next slide, please, Sarah. And looking forward to the future a bit, do you see the need to develop a catalogue of methods and tests of fair assessment of various digital objects? This is work that is progressing at the moment in other projects, and it'd be interesting to see if this is still something that people would need, would be interested in, or could use. Next slide, please. So we have 3 conversation starters and 3 conversations, topics for conversations for the next hour and a half, or just less than that. Those will be in 3 different areas, and we'll have about 25 minutes each for each of those conversations. The first one is actually based on a recommendation from last year, which is researchers require access to dedicated local support to assistance to assist the general and discipline-specific verifications process of data, research software, and semantic artifacts. So the first conversation will be on supporting researchers in the verification process. And our conversation starter will be Maaike from CESTA and the Finnish Social Science Data Archive. Maaike is a development manager at the Finnish Social Science Data Archive. She has participated in several EU-funded projects, contributing to the European Open Science Cloud on topics related to metadata, fair long-term preservation, and repository certification. She is one of Fair Impact's champions, currently is chair of the CESTA Trust and Landscape Working Group, as a member of the EOS Task Force on Fair Metrics and Digital Objects, and as a member of the Core Trust Seal Board. Maaike, would you like to take over and have a, whilst I spend my time coughing?
Okay, thank you, Maaike, for the introduction, and thank you for having me here today. This is a conversion starter, so I think I have about 5 minutes. So I'm not going to cover all the ground here. And next slide, please. So Maaike already mentioned that I'm from CESTA and the Finnish Social Science Data Archive. So I think we can skip this slide, but there are links if you want to know more about those organizations. Next, please. So I was asked to talk about the experiences that we have as a sort of fair supporting organization for researchers. Yeah, I'd like to start by stating a main principle that should be self-evident, that researchers should always follow the existing best practices in their own discipline and domain. These will, of course, change over time, and hopefully the FAIR principles drive these changes, and I know they have driven the changes. In recent years, we've seen a clear change towards a more positive approach to opening and sharing data. I think that's evident. But today I have, to start the conversation, I have two main questions for this group. The first one is, how much should a researcher know about FAIR? And I will give an example. And then I think a bigger question is, what would be the optimal division of labor in supporting researchers in verification? And the third question related to this is, how domain specific are these areas, or are they not domain specific at all? So where can we find general fit for all solutions? So the first question, how much should researchers know about FAIR? I think Maaike already mentioned the previous recommendation that researchers should have these support services. I totally agree with that. Based on the experiences here at the FSD, as a CESTA service provider, I would say that opening data has become mainstream only in the last few years, even though the social science data archives, we have a history that goes back to the 1950s, 1960s. So actually there's a long culture of data sharing in social sciences before anyone mentioned open science or FAIR. But FAIR has really accelerated the developments. Typically, I think a social scientist, at least in Finland, will get support from their local institution. So, for example, the university library, when they are applying for funding and creating data management plans, which are more or less mandatory nowadays. Of course, they are really paper-based or even PDF-based at the moment, or Trails project, among others, is trying to address that. In addition, at least Finnish researchers, they tend to contact us if they have specific questions about data archiving, data depositing, and how to inform participants so that sharing data is possible after the project has ended. So we do provide a lot of support for Finnish researchers all around. Then the researcher will deposit their data with us, following the guidelines we provide. We curate and enrich the data metadata, for example, provide the persistent identification, and we publish the metadata and data and add needed access restrictions. So we do strive to make the metadata and data as fair as reasonable, and I think the following presenters will talk about that reasonability and the metrics and tests. And in our scenario, the CESTA Ericsson provides the common catalog and provides guidance for the service providers, not directly to researchers usually. So this was a very simple case, but life is not that simple. And that I think brings us to the next question. So what is the optimal division of labor in supporting researchers in verification? So there are several institutions on European level, national level, institutional level in the FAIR game. They can be domain specific, they can be general, they can be technical service providers, tool providers, they can be research infrastructures, e-infrastructures, repositories, libraries, projects. So how can the researcher navigate through all this jungle and find the right service at the right time? And I mean, I think there are so many more questions than answers, but I do hope that we can get the discussion ongoing. And even this is complicated. I haven't even mentioned EOSC, so that's another thing. So I will conclude by saying that I argue that the role of trustworthy domain-specific data repositories is really a key thing in making and especially keeping data fair over time. And I think this is an important aspect we just don't want to think about today. We also need to think about the future researchers. So I think researchers should know how to choose a repository that will ensure the data is or becomes fair and stays fair. So they need to understand the principles, at least in general level. They have to have tools to compare or assess repositories. Or maybe it's not even the researchers, maybe it's the funders or the universities or publishers that need these tools to compare or assess repositories so that they can make recommendations that the researchers can then follow. But I'm looking forward to the discussions. So thank you.
Thank you, Maaike. Has anybody got any thoughts about this directly now? Sarah, could we stop sharing the presentation for a second so I can see who we've got comments and questions, thoughts? Ooh. Yes, please, Daniel, go ahead.
Right, so can you hear me? Yeah, I hope so. So just to provide some thoughts while some people come also with other comments about the presentation, I wanted to address the part of what I think about the researcher responsibility, right? Because on the one hand, I think many researchers, maybe they don't need to be concerned about all aspects of fairness, right? However, they do, in my opinion, they do need, or they are responsible for properly describing the resources so they become findable, right? So maybe they are not that responsible on how things get found, or besides depositing something in a public repository, but I think they should be accountable for properly describing the resources. However, and this is a very big caveat, is that what we cannot pretend is that every time someone comes with a new institutional repository or a domain-specific repository where people need to put stuff in, we ask everyone to spend a lot of time filling yet another form when this information can be found elsewhere, that is in papers, in previous deposits or stuff. So I think there is a shared responsibility. Oh, I'm getting a little bit of echo, sorry. I think there is a shared responsibility between what we demand from researchers in terms of, well, we cannot describe your data if you don't give us a description, and asking the same information again and again and again when new repositories come and they need to ingest this data.
Francoise, you have a comment or a question?
Yes, I have a comment. I have my national hat here. I would like to say that in France, there is a strong push in the national open science strategy for people to publish their data, and in a fair way. It's written that way. And we have an initiative which is called Recherche Data Gov, which is setting up we are a very centralized country, so it can be different from other countries, but Recherche Data Gov is an ecosystem which, among other things, organizes local support to support researchers to publish fair data. And so there are entities which are, or groups of entities which apply to become what we call Atelier de la Donnée. And there is a selection, and then these entities these ateliers are here to support the local researchers. So it's at a regional level in general. and it's organized at the national level with, and I think it's also useful to say that there is a need to support the people who support the researchers. And I think that in the Atelier de la Donnée, in Research Data Gov, one interesting characteristic of the system is that the people who do the support tasks are together and they can talk together and they are improving their expertise together, first at the national level and then together with their colleagues from other entities. So I think the fact that this can be organized a bit wholly, and then there is also a role for thematic expertise centers, because of course people who are in a library do not have the thematic expertise as it was said. So the people from the generalist support can go to the specific thematic centers to get information if needed. We do not, it's just beginning, so we do not cover all the themes, but there are some already. So I was adding that in the spreadsheet, a reference to that system.
Thanks, Francoise. Maggie, have you got a comment to make as well?
Yeah, I would just say that I think that what researchers need to pick up in terms of knowledge about FAIR and etc. is that they themselves will really benefit from getting more organized, making sure they have captured metadata at all stages throughout the research data lifecycle, etc. Because they forget if they don't document, if they don't organize things, they lose data, they lose information, and then they have to spend a lot of time recreating things. And also asking researchers what are some of their stumbling points now is when they try to reuse other people's data and results, they often get stuck because they cannot find exact definitions or exact knowledge on how things were actually performed. So if everyone just steps up a little bit, puts in a little bit more effort, then I think everyone will just save a lot of time, because people are concerned about wasting time. But I think moving towards FAIR and really using the FAIR principles with the help of support staff, everyone will benefit from that.
Thanks, Maggie. Does anyone else want to add? I noticed there's a few messages coming in the chat as well.
Well, there is one. I mean, there are two reactions to what I said. One from Mark, which mostly I think he's agreeing with what I said, and the other one about the aspect of responsibility, like how much. What do I mean when I say someone is responsible for their metadata? Well, on the one hand, yes, I mean scientific responsibility, of course. However, I mean. This may change in the future in terms of, let's say that I'm developing AI models, or not AI models, but a hydrology model, right? And my hydrology model is used in a setting to inform a decision policy maker on building a dam, or on how to behave when, I don't know, when building flooding maps or doing simulations. If I don't properly record the metadata and the limitations of what I've done, then I'm somewhat responsible for what I'm delivering, right? So in those senses, I'm not saying obviously that we have legal responsibility, but in some cases, there may be something more than just providing a description. If these are not captured accurately, there may be other consequences, right?
Francoise, go ahead, please.
Yes, I have a comment on the fact that capturing the proper metadata, provenance, and so on is important, because one obstacle, a known obstacle, for people to decide to publish their data is that they say it will be reused not properly. And so it goes with publishing data, the fact that they have to be described properly and to be cited then properly, provenance has to be recorded. So there is a real need that these things are done properly, are done accurately. And I think this means that the author of the data has to be involved somehow with help. But I think it's difficult not to do this thing accurately without a contribution from the authors. And really, there is a very big, when you talk to people about publishing their data, many of them will tell you, but it will not be used accurately and it will be bad for me. So if it is good for them, it has to be properly done.
Thanks, Francois. I agree with the need to be well done. The challenge always is with something being well done is it takes time and effort and money and all the rest. Anyway, Richard, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm a data steward for a very large research group, roughly about 150 people. And generally, when I speak to my colleagues, this is generally what the ratio is, like one data steward, one RDM person to maybe 150 researchers. One of the things that we try to do here at our center is to not to disrupt how researchers do and go about their research and their science. Is we try to find solutions that automatically within their research workflow process to capture and to make it happen automatically within the way they do their research. Basically, not disrupt their process, because researchers do not have the time, do not have any time to spare learning new ways of doing things. This is commonly the issue and the problem with researchers. But we try to develop tools, applications, software, bespoke solutions that automatically capture the information, the metadata, that makes it easier for them to go about doing their research. And this is probably the only way that since I've been working on these various different solutions and building them myself, this is probably the only way to be able to do this, is to capture the information without them actually thinking about the fair process. There's absolutely no way, in my opinion, to be able to push out all of the information, all of the knowledge that we have as professionals, to push that information out to researchers. It's just no way of doing that. And this I think we should be looking at solutions that does it for them automatically, as opposed to trying to train them and teach them a process that they probably never will understand and probably never will implement in their research lives.
Thanks, Richard. It's a very good point about the time and how much they will possibly never do these things. Javier, please go ahead.
Well, thank you. Just to say that this item of responsibility is a recurring item that happens in a lot of fora. And my position in this is very, very clear. You cannot control what others do with your data. That is absolutely possible in the context of open science. It would be just exactly as trying to control what happens in your marriage, stipulating another agreement or another clauses, or changing the law. Okay, human condition is how it is, so it is an anthropological aspect. What happens then? that it is the scientific community, the one who, through the consensus, which is on the base of all scientific activity, we make consensus about terms, we make up consensus about validity, we make consensus about lines of investigation, etc., etc. What research do we make, and if this research is correct or not, and if the laws of nature or of society work or not, that is made by consensus, not by the law. Therefore, the law is unable to control what is going to be done with the data that we produce. If we are in the open science movement, the only thing that we have to take into account is, first, we have to be careful with what comes from upstream, and that would be then in our filters, that would be semantic, technical, that would be legal, etc., etc. And we have to be very, very aware of the permissions that we give downstream, so the next researcher would be able to make science with our piece of information that has accrued the piece of information that we received before. Therefore, to control what a third party will do would be exactly as impossible as to control what your partner does in your marriage. The law is unable to do so, no license will be able, and the only way to do so is through a permanent conversation about what is valid and what is not.
Thanks, Javier. One thing I've always thought interesting is that they comment that the most interesting thing done with your data will always be done by somebody else. And I think this is always an important point with this kind of thing, is that you may think what you've got is really great and you're trying to keep hold of it, yet the more interesting things is going to be done by somebody else. Tassos, do you like to make a comment?
Yes, Tassos from OpenAir. I would like to add here that regarding the responsibility, I was wondering who should be the final responsible for making the data fair? Should it be the researcher itself, or like a mediator, like librarians, or should it be the responsibility for the repository manager? And in that case, what would be also the guidance in order to and how this guidance will also spread out in order to facilitate this process and make these people aware about what they are going to do and what they should do.
Thanks, Tassos. Daniel, coming back with something?
Yeah, I wanted briefly to answer to Richard when he said that the researchers really don't need to know about any part of the fairness process, and here I would like to partly disagree, providing an example. So usually they don't care about the fair process because they don't see any consequences of it, and the only thing is like, well, why would I care if I make things fair, if I make things findable in your platform, right? I do not see any immediate benefit from that. However, I've also been creating, for example, catalogs of research software, and when I show them that, hey, when you add a citation file in your repository, you see these benefits, they immediately adopt it. No doubt, and everyone is super enthusiastic because suddenly they know how to make their code citable, and a new thing appears in GitHub or whatever to support that metadata has an impact, right? So sometimes it's also about involving them in the project, but they have to get out something of it. If they do not see any benefits, then they won't do it, of course.
Richard, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I would like to rebut just a little bit. First off, I think it's extremely important that researchers do know FAIR. I'm in the biomedical domain, so these researchers are keenly aware of FAIR and also keenly aware of the importance of FAIR, and keenly aware of how to propagate their research and make their research available to their colleagues, and quite frankly out to the rest of the world. And this is what they live for. What I have learned in this process is there's a list of priorities for researchers, and of course the priorities are typically the science, the research, the analytics, the analysis. And when it comes to FAIR, as Maaike have said, it's the last thing in the process. It's the last thing when they're compiling their paper, when they're trying to produce some sort of an output. It's the last thing they think about. It is important to them, but isn't important to them in the beginning of the process. And I have tried to communicate this to researchers during the process. If you do this in the beginning of the process, the end of the process, it's going to be quite simple, and it's going to make your life much easier. But researchers prioritize their time in such a way that this is the last mile in the process. So in working with them, I figure out, okay, what can I do to maximize their time? What can I do to make sure that this is fair? As a data steward, this is important to me. As a research data management person, this is important to me. Open science, this is important to me. So because I have the IT skills, because I understand the process, I have developed tools to blindly make their data fair, without having to say, make this fair, make this fair, make this fair. And this is what I say. I prefer to advocate. I prefer to spend my time developing tools. Although I continue to preach fair, but I know that if I develop these tools properly, it's going to be fair at the end of the process. This is typically what I'm trying to say here.
Thanks, Richard. Alexandra, you have a comment as well.
Hello, everyone. I will side with Daniel's comment on the FAIR. It's important to show to people what you can really do with FAIR and with tools and applications. So build tools and applications that use FAIR data, and if they weren't fair, what you couldn't do. So that people understand why all this fuss about FAIR data. So I think we need a little bit of more applications of and success stories of what happens with the FAIR data.
I think that's a very good point about success stories of how well it has worked. I've certainly seen before in other areas where sharing data, success stories have been quite impressive, but they're not shared that often and not spoken about too often, which is a shame. And I do agree. I think that success is an important part. Francoise.
Yes, thank you. About success stories, I think in astronomy we share data with an internationally defined descriptive framework which allows to interoperate and everything. And the point on success stories is that it requires work behind the scene. And so if I have told the story about astronomy many times, but there are people working hard to do the standards, and there are people working hard to implement them in the data services. So this is a bit unavoidable. And it's not the individuals, it's people who are here to do the job. It's completely different from the researchers with their own data. It provides the necessary framework for the researchers to share afterwards.
Yes, astronomy has always been one of those forefront ones which have done a lot because it's always been a difficult area with so much data. I can certainly understand. Javier, like to say something more?
Yes, it's about the success stories. I would describe two kind of scenarios. One would be we could say the EOSC framework scenario, where we're speaking about FAIR, that FAIR exists outside the EOSC scenario without naming itself FAIR. And I'm referring to, for example, OpenStreetMap. It is really incredible how many possibilities OpenStreetMap has provided because their data is fair. So all stories over OpenStreetMaps, we could say they are fair. For example, one of the examples that we all know is the Cordis website from the European Union. The Cordis website uses two sources of fair data. First one is the public data that's earned by the European Commission about the funded projects. The second one is OpenStreetMaps, which is they use the leaflet library in order to insert it into the web. So there we do have a fair data story without nobody calling it himself or itself we are fair data, but it is fair data because it complies with all the requirements. Yesterday I saw another map that was about the konbini stores, the competition about konbini stores in Japan, but there are plenty of constructions of composed fair works that have been done through these systems. Perhaps what we have to say is that we have also to think about the fair data that's out there, that they do not know that they are fair data, and we do not take them into under our radar because they are not in the scope of the EOSC.
I think this is a very good point. There are a lot of good examples out there of where data isn't said to be fancy, fair, but it is actually that. And it's not just the OpenStreetMaps. I think there's plenty of other good examples, even things like all the train and transport data that can be shared, such that that is now, a lot of that is very much open as well. This is all very important stuff. Francois, another. You're muted.
No, I forgot to put down my hand, sorry.
I was interested in something that was picked up earlier by Mary about people using excuses for not making their data fair, particularly GDPR. Do you like to say anything more about that, Mary?
Well, yeah, I think it's something that, first of all, I'd like to say that the Finnish researchers are really positive about open science. We've had several national projects and so on, and you can see the impact. And also we have had FSD has been there for 25 years, and we've done a lot of work with researchers to change the research culture. But I think this is what we see in several discussions, that the researchers do think to try to find excuses, and GDPR is one of the new ones. And I think the solution there, as in many other cases, is the good data management from day zero and during the whole life cycle. So you can, even sensitive data can be shared, but you do need to be careful. You usually need some sort of repository to handle the, for example, the access conditions and access to data. But it can be shared if you do it correctly. And then if it can't be shared, then that's also really important to realize and know and document and be aware of. So another thing that we see is also that some researchers do not care about GDPR, and they might put data in Zenodo or elsewhere without proper care. So it's yeah, GDPR has also brought a lot of well, there's a lot. The researchers need to know more about that, but it's also, I think, highlighted some of the key issues in good data management. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary. As we have 3 topics, although this one seems to be, certainly from the chat, a lot of discussion. I'd like to move on to the next topic if possible, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Mike asked me to give a short talk about our approaches to stimulate the discussion here in this meeting. And the issue is about creating discipline-specific FAIR matrix and how we achieved it. Next slide, please. So we initially started, so that's how it was written in the proposal, to trying define FAIR metrics for the social sciences and humanities community. And our approach was to identify community-specific FAIR habits or practices towards FAIR. And what we did was we investigated the existing infrastructure, of course. So we took a look at the interfaces which were available, which metadata was provided and how it was provided and so on. We took a look at here publications which were available from the community and white papers about FAIR. And what we did, and I think that's also relevant for this meeting today, we collected information about FAIR habits by collecting FAIR implementation profiles and by here stimulating or encouraging our use case partners to provide FAIR implementation profiles. And this is a nice tool. There is an online web wizard for it, which allows here to collect this information about FAIR implementation profiles or habits in a user-friendly way. So as I said, we started with the social sciences and humanities community. So that's how we thought we would. And please, next slide. But we very quickly discovered that it's not so easy to do this for such a large community. So this is on the left side of the slide. You can see our findings with respect to metadata standards, which are provided by two large infrastructures, Chester and Clarin. And you can see that there's almost no or only one metadata standard, which is common to both infrastructures. So we realized that we have to focus on a smaller community, and therefore we started to focus on the social sciences community. So from where we had a lot of contacts from the Chester community. So the right side here on the slide shows a convergence matrix, which we found out by analyzing FAIR implementation profiles. And here we found that there is indeed some commonality with respect, for example, to metadata schemas which are used, protocols, vocabularies, and licenses. But still here, we can see that it's not completely homogeneous, that there is some heterogeneity even within this community. Next slide, please. Yeah, so and we did the same, or we still do the same exercise with here the environmental and geosciences community. And in general, our experience is that it is not easy to do or to define FAIR metrics for large communities. When we started this process there, we immediately discovered that, for example, there are at least two very large communities, the biological sciences and earth sciences, of course, here within the environmental sciences. And also the earth sciences are here divided in many subdisciplines, which we potentially would have to care about, and which we now already also start to do so. But as a result, it means that if we want to define community or discipline-specific FAIR metrics, we need to do this for a quite large number of communities. And this, of course, means that we also need a large number of FAIR metrics for this. Next slide. So, but anyway, we started to do so, and we set up initial version of FAIR metrics for the social sciences. and shared this with the community. As a result, we found that here the social sciences metrics are a bit more strict in comparison to the generic metrics, which in this example, Fuji was implementing. So this means that scores also may be different if users are using generic FAIR metrics in comparison to discipline-specific metrics. And it may occur that these scores may be lower, of course. So this is quite hard to explain for users, and may lead to frustration in the end. And but this is the result of here narrowing down the criteria for FAIR metrics for individual communities. Next slide, please. So as maybe some ideas for discussion, I would just summarize our experiences here. So, well, I showed diversities are very diverse, and communities or FAIR communities are hard to define. And as a result, here also FAIR community-specific metrics are hard to define, and we would need many of these. Then assessment results may vary between community-specific and generic metrics, and this may lead to confusion and to frustration if scores for example, discipline-specific metrics assessment results are lower in comparison to generic ones. Of course, the diversification of FAIR metrics is in general, of course, associated with risks. The FAIR EARS task force already mentioned the necessity for governance structures and so on for defining FAIR. Well, in general, we have to decide which way to go. Do we really want a fragmentation of many FAIR metrics, or should we head towards a harmonization of FAIR and rather focus on, well, generic common FAIR metrics which fits for all? So these are just some ideas for discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks for jumping in whilst I was coughing. This all came from a recommendation from last session that the development and sharing, discoverability, and reuse of FAIR implementation profiles necessitate enhanced community cooperation. This collaborative effort is crucial for supporting the creation of domain-specific assessments, ensuring that the principles of FAIR are effectively implemented and tailored to specific research needs. So that was the original recommendation. And now we have an opportunity to talk. And yes, Barbara, please go ahead.
Yes, so I see your effort, Robert, to make it discipline specific, which is really not easy to achieve. And there are quite some efforts to do this worldwide, like the World FAIR project and World FAIR Plus project, to really come to decisions within a subdiscipline. It's still not easy to implement, and also if they decide to have a set of community standards to follow, doesn't mean that this will then be done everywhere in all the institutions, projects, etc. of that discipline. So I must say that actually we should already be quite happy that within one community researchers are using the same disciplines. And so the FIP is about having decisions within a community, right? And the community might entail many researchers in that, but this is still challenging, right? So there is some decisions. This happens already a few years that people are discussing what they should implement, but as we see, there is a difference between what they decide and still implement, and we need to increase that. But I think the FIP is just an approach to make transparent what they want to actually implement, and then also to find out what are the difference between communities of the same discipline. And then you need additional effort to converge probably on better solutions or in solutions that are interoperable, because although you are fair, you might still not be interoperable if you are using different community standards, but it's a lot of effort to be done.
Thanks, Barbara. Francoise.
Yes, if I take my astronomer's hat again, for us, interoperability within the discipline is absolutely key, and this is why we make standards. So in general, interoperability is the last one at the bottom. And so when I really think that to make these things acceptable in the disciplines, the way FAIR is measured has to be linked to the discipline. And I agree fully that it has to be defined by each FAIR metrics has to be defined by the practitioners of the discipline. So again, this requires work, but it's probably worth. Because if you tell astronomers that astronomy is interoperability is optional, they think that you are not serious about FAIR.
Thanks, Francois. Daniel, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about one of the bullet points in Robert's slide that said that creating domain-specific metrics is difficult. Well, I would like to challenge that, no? Because creating metrics, I think it's extremely easy. What it's extremely difficult is making others convince others that your metric is the right one to use, no? Is that what you meant? Like the convergence and the standardization of metrics, domain-specific metrics is hard?
Well, I mean, endorsement is the most complicated thing. Creating metrics is easy, but getting endorsement, that's a long process.
Okay, then I fully agree.
If I can add to that, I think it's easier in disciplines which already discuss how they share their data, because they have a knowledge of how they do it, and they can find the metrics which are acceptable by everybody. So maybe it has to start with some to see what happens.
Maaike, can I just say one word to that? So I think that what Robert did is, Fuji and these services are really important, but what I would look forward is to use a FIP or a profile, a list of standards decided by community as a evaluation service. Check against these decisions, check your data if your data complies with these decisions that were taken on the FIP level. That would be nice. So you allow people not to use a profile that you try to compile together for a discipline, but the profile that they decided to follow. And that would be already a step forward, yeah, to you.
Francois?
Yes, just a point. I am always worried when people speak of metrics, because I know too well how this can be badly used afterwards. So I think that I don't know if this is foreseen at some point, but to discuss how to evaluate the biases of each metric which is proposed, and to make them explicit, to study the biases and to write them attached to the metrics, so that people are not too confident about the metrics. And going deep going to the disciplinary level makes the biases less critical, because people know what they are doing. The general interoperability, it's another story, but for the discipline, biases seen by the disciplinary people, it's probably the best way to do it. But I think it's very important to always have in mind that biases are an issue as soon as you discuss metrics.
Thanks, Francois. Robert, did you want to make any comment to that, or?
Yes, I can. So, what, for example, I don't know if this really fits to the bias argument now, but what we discovered, for example, when we collected the fair implementation profiles. So, getting information about here the capabilities of infrastructures or archives depends on the people who are filling these profiles, right? And in practice, it actually turns out that well, there is the people just don't really fully know about the capacities of their infrastructures, so they fill out something which they think is there, but this not necessarily must be there. And even if it is there, it is really hard to expose this in a way that it fits to the FAIR scenario. One of the reasons is that FAIR is very focused on here identifiers, right? So this is the starting point of every analysis, a DOI or a URI, which leads to a data set or a data stream. Then if at that point is no further information about any infrastructural technology, so any FAIR assessment will then not fail, but it will just discover that there is nothing. So it is a mixture between knowledge about infrastructure, getting the right people, and then it's also important to expose this information so machines can find it. So a lot of here these exchange protocols, for example, is really tacit information. This is something which people give each other by email, or when they set up a data portal, they collect this information by whatever methods, but it is not machine actionable. And this is actually something which should be there. So, and this is causing, of course, then a lot of bias, right? But it is not really bias. It is also here exposing bad fair practice, in my opinion.
Maaike brought up an important point about it being a continuous process. So Maaike, would you like to elaborate a bit more?
Yes, so I represent ICOS, which is a research infrastructure on environmental and earth science, climate science. We learned about FIPs and FERs and things like that through working, for instance, with Barbara in the context of several projects we've been doing in the so-called ENVRI constellation in the last almost 10 years now. And so we think that we understand what is meant by these profiles and figuring out which fair enabling resources we are using. But I think even after being exposed to all of this information and knowledge and working together with experts, we are not really understanding exactly how it works. So it fits what Robert just said and others in comments. It's so true, but that we are sort of amateurs waddling around in this world of professionally decided definitions, and we're not sure what answers always to report. And I also think there is a bit of a pressure to really end up with as high a fairness score as possible in all kinds of situations, because people do not understand that evaluating yourself is a way of learning how to improve your own practices. It's only shown as just like the notes you get from school, that oh, you got a 4 there and you got a 3 there or whatever, but they don't understand that this is a tool for self-improvement. But we lose also the competence in infrastructures, for instance, because people are shifted in and out and move on to other things. So it's not just that the process of creating FIPs, evaluating against them, etc., needs to be continuous, but also the access to people who have the competence and skills needs to be continuous as well. And they're coming back to the first topic of today about where is the responsibility between say, research performing organizations and their data stewards / experts, etc. Everything just comes back to there not being enough competencies around that you can consult to help you give consistency in this whole process. And I'm really concerned about that.
Thanks, Maggie. Barbara, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, so just a comment, Robert, I see this issue that people are just putting in something, yeah, because they want to be compliant too, yeah. Could be. That's actually not what we are propagating. It's not what we are doing. We really see this as a tool to make a landscaping, yeah, exercise. What do you have now? Actually, but now what we decided is to include status, like under development, yeah, or in preparation, then in review, and then approved by the community, to really make this as a step, yeah, a very agreed step within the community. And then in addition, we are really working now on the FIP to DMP, so that what there has been decided should really go into the daily data management work of data stewards. So that's really important, that this is not just something theoretical, but really put into practice.
Robert, please.
Yeah, Barbara, that's very true. And I would say we have the same number of occurrences when there actually are more FAIR supporting services or would be in place, which are not reported in FIPS because, well, there is the situation Maggie just described, that someone set up that service in the year 2002 or whatever, left the company or the institution, and no one is aware about that. So, and this is also very true. So, and if people are then filling in just, here that they are supporting, for example, DOIs because they have minted one DOI, that's very nice that you now have this status list. So, because then it's easier to discover the actual implementation status of that.
Daniel, you have something else to add?
Yeah, this is a slightly changing topics. It's about the concept of fear and frustration, which I very much relate to, and you had it in your slides, Robert, right? So sometimes what I feel like is that one of the risks of all these also domain-specific metrics and so on is that we are kind of over-bureaucratizing the collection of metadata, which for me, it's in the end, it's like, well, there are other aspects of FAIR, of course, and I wonder, like, by maybe adding too many things or too many requirements regarding, for example, interoperability. What happens if my community is creating or proposing a new standard? FAIR assessment tools are always behind, right? So are they going to penalize all the data sets that are starting to adopt the standards until the FAIR assessment tool gets up to speed, right? So I liked what was said before. I think was Mari said it, right, or Maggie, I can't remember, but that it's very very important that we keep up the communities up to, well, in line to some of these FAIR assessments, and very important also to try not to overburden the researchers with some of this stuff, no? So I would like to hear your thoughts about this. Also, one more thing, one more example, no? That maybe the obsession with filling up metadata, but not providing good enough quality on the metadata fields. For example, I really don't care in many cases that there is a creation date, but I will get a fair assessment score that is higher if I provide a creation date rather than a description, which is what I actually need, or I get a crappy description but a very accurate creation date. No, so this balance.
Shall I respond, Mike? Is it okay?
Please, Robert, go ahead.
So yeah, it's true that it is hard to catch up for assessment tool with evolving standards, but well, I would say it depends on the maintenance of these tools, and in reality, I think standards are not evolving so very fast. So we see it in the moment, for example, with row crates, which are still evolving, but it is, I would say, semi-established. It's not it's hard to get real world examples which really work, for example, but well, once this is established, well, because it takes so long, well, fair assessment tools will hopefully be able to catch up with the development in general. But this really depends on maintenance of the tools and so on. And yeah, but in general, it is difficult to decide if FAIR metrics should include, for example, the quality of the content. Or in the moment we have within the group in FAIR Impact, we have a discussion about, for example, validation of content, right? So, but a simple example is if you have an identifier, and if you verify that the identifier complies with a schema or syntax, right? So this is a classic test. But the next test would be if this identifier really resolves, right? This is a quality check, for example, which Fuji performs, but well, we still discuss if this is really necessary. Another issue is if you provide metadata properties, which contain here insufficient contents. Is the title too short, or is the date of the publication, is it in date in the future or well formatted and so on? And I just can say I don't know. There is a really nice paper which has been published during the last weeks from Candela et al., which we're comparing a lot of FAIR assessment tools, and they are partly arguing that it is not the role of FAIR assessment tools to verify content, for example. So this is something which has to be discussed, and I know that, for example, in the well, Mark is here, that he is trying to define a basic FAIR metric which hopefully fits for all, and well, then this defines what the basic requirements for fairness actually would be, and if it is including content or quality check or not. Maybe Mark can say something about that.
I was actually hoping that Daniel will come on and say something about that in the next topic for discussion. One thing that was interesting is Armin brought up an interesting comment. Instead of saying discipline specific, we might have to say method specific. And I'm wondering whether that is a nice lead in to Daniel's particular topic. This final topic is based on a recommendation that a broader community must be engaged and solicited for collaboration in developing a comprehensive catalogue of methods. And in our last conversation topic, methods and tests, do we need a catalogue for these? And hopefully Daniel can say something towards this. Daniel is a distinguished researcher at the Ontology Engineering Group at the Artificial Intelligence Department of the Computer Science Faculty of the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. He also collaborates with the Information Sciences Institute of the University of Southern California. His research activities focus on e-science and the semantic web, specifically on how to increase the understandability of research software and scientific workflows using their provenance and exposing them as linked data. Is also involved in the EU projects Fair Impact, OS Trails, and eVerse. And it's something to do with the OS Trails, where we're talking about this here today, about a catalogue of methods. Also works on the RDA group's FAIR for ML and co-chairs the SciCodes Consortium. Daniel, would you like to take a look and start a last conversation?
Thank you, Mike. So we can go to the next slide. I was asked to be a conversation starter for this topic, so I do not have formal slides like the other speakers. I just have questions for you, questions that I hope they help spark a little bit of debate, no? And let me elaborate a little bit on them, because I think I have 3 main sets of questions. Well, the first one is that, following up the previous presentation, I wanted to know how many of you are actually defining your own metrics and tests, and if so, what is the reason for doing so? What is preventing you from reusing existing ones? And maybe I was thinking about this, and maybe one of the reasons why you are having trouble reusing existing metrics is because it's a little difficult to find them, right? And that leads to my next set of questions. Can we go to the next slide, please? Which is, if you are making your tests or metrics findable, how are you doing so, right? So, because we, as a FAIR tool, FAIR assessment tool developer myself, yeah, it's very, it's very easy to tell someone else how they should comply for assessment, but then looking at being a little introspective, sometimes we don't follow all the FAIR principles ourselves as well. For example, for each of the FAIR tests that we are and metrics that we are using, many of the assessment tools do not have a proper description in a machine-readable format, so they can be discovered by machines, right? And I can go through 2 examples. So I was looking into one of my tools, which is FIPs, and there, for example, when I was looking at how we identify each test and how we describe each test and check that we are doing, which is with each test, and the way that we explain what each test is doing is basically on the UI when you get the response, right? So we are telling you in the UI, well, this is what I checked for, and this was the answer. But even though each test has an identifier, we don't have the machine-readable description of that. So those tests can only be discovered if you go to the website of my tool and you start using it. So they are not discoverable by machines so far. And I looked at the Fuji documentation as well, and I saw something similar. Well, there they had a full documentation, separate documentation page where each of the tests were enumerated, and you saw a definition of the what that test was doing and the expectations of that test. However, there was no I did not find any machine-readable representation of these tests so far, although I know Robert is starting to work on this, right? We are also starting to think about these topics in the OS Trails, project. So I wanted to get some comment, maybe first from the people that are outside FAIR Impact and OS Trails, on what is it that you are doing to actually make your tests findable. And do you actually think that you would need to find tests in your own community? And then finally, that also leads to my last set of questions. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. which is whether, okay, well, if we make some of these tests discoverable, should we have test registries and aggregators that include them, no? So I know of some registries like fairsharing.org. I see that we have Alison and Susanna are part of the attendees of this call. And in fair sharing, you can find some metrics, well, and other standards that people use for defining stuff, no? So maybe we should use registries such as fair sharing to include tests and metrics. But the question is, should all tests and metrics be included there? Because maybe there would be an explosion. And do we want actually domain-specific metrics, all domain-specific metrics in a general repository like fair sharing? Or and how do we actually include the notion of governance, of what do different communities maybe have stamped with a seal of approval and said, well, you know, you may define whatever you want, but we are gonna look into this. So basically as a means to kind of promote the reusability of some set of tests in a horizontal manner across domains. For example, does the dataset or the resource have a license? That seems like a very horizontal test that is applicable to any kind of resource, no? Well, maybe some communities need a very domain-specific license, but that's like an additional test, no? You first check whether something has a license, and then you check the type of license. So, what do you guys think? Should we include all of them? Maybe that would lead to an explosion of too many metrics included in the registries, and therefore, when you search for something to reuse, you would be bombarded with so many tests that are so similar that it would be very difficult to identify the differences between them. Or maybe we should aim, well, we are trying also to define what does governance mean in this setting. But anyway, I would like to know if you guys have any comments, questions about all these three sets of questions.
Thanks, Daniel. The chat is fairly busy. Trying to see if there's anything. Has anybody got any comments or questions they'd like to make? Whilst they take a look at ones we can pick up in the chat.
I could just say thank you, and that was lovely. And from the point of view of fair sharing, as we've talked with Daniel and Mark about in the past, we are working through the creation. We already have metrics in fair sharing, the initial versions of what Mark was doing a year or so ago, and we plan to expand that within OS Trails for metrics and benchmarks as part of this. That's all. The only comment I was going to make at that point.
Thank you, Alison. I also see that Mark posted something in the chat that I'm going to read out loud because he seems to be under the weather. So he says, I want to respond to Daniel's questions about governance. I see governance being interested in two main issues. First, is this metric really testing fairness versus popularity of a digital object? And second, is the test implementation, whoops, chat is jumping around, sorry. Is the test implementation coded in a manner that it is unbiased, or does the code make too many expectations that are unrelated to the metric? All right, so any reactions from any of these two answers? So I think we had Françoise before discussing the aspect of fairness, and well, I do agree. I mean, we have to aim for things being as unbiased as possible. I am not sure I completely understand. What do you mean by does the code make too many expectations that are unrelated to the metric? Like the metric is supposed to measure something and the code goes into a different, it's branching out or something? I do not understand. Feel free to write in the chat. In any case, in the meantime, are there any reactions about this? Robert, do you have any views?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the point you mentioned initially, that it is very important to document and to harmonize these tests, and so that one knows what actually is happening in the background. Then you can be very clear about what the expectations of the tool are, and if you comply with this, and yeah, so. And in practice, I think it's important that there is the possibility to actually compare expectations with reality, or yeah, and that's what actually FAIR tools are doing. And so just to claim you are fair does not mean that you really are. So there has to be something which does it at some level. I also like the comment from Mark here in the chat there, which goes a little bit into the direction with that if we have a good documentation of FAIR metrics and tests, we do not need to harmonize all of these, and we have a multitude, a plurality of tests, and this is what I really like, and what we in FAIR Impact also are strongly supporting. So because if you have tests which allow you to take a look at many aspects of FAIR, then you also have the possibility to decide for your community what you want to implement. Or if you think there is something which is tested and was not found, so then it's also then worth to investigate why it is so. Is it the tool? Is it by implementation? So there are a lot of possibilities what can go wrong in the world of FAIR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Alexandra.
Hi again. I really like the idea of actually making the assessment software fair as well. So having an API that resolves to something that is interoperable for the tests and the assessments, and also publishing the tests somewhere that can be found. The fair sharing registry could be a good start as well. But one more thing related to the governance is about feedback on those tests. And this is a great platform, for example, that we are all here and we are discussing them, and you get feedback about, how people find the assessment of your tools. Fair Impact also organized all these workshops that were really brilliant. I think this is something that needs to continue for the assessors and their tools to be getting feedback and to keep improving, but also the tests and the tools to also become fair.
Daniel, if you want to make one last comment, because we are at...
No, I think I fully agree. I think I fully agree, and I was thinking more and more lately about, well, given all the fair assessment, all the fair assessments that are being produced, and now that there is discussion on some science knowledge graphs, including also references to, hey, I automatically did some fair assessment on this resource maybe a year ago, and here were the results, right? That we actually need to make the descriptions of the tests available online. Otherwise, we may encounter ourselves like maybe a tool is not continued, but the report from that tool was published at some point on the web, and therefore, if you don't have, is what Robert said, if you have the tests as black boxes and you don't even describe them with additional metadata, that those reports will be completely worthless, because you don't even know what is it that they were checking for, right? So I think we are trying to pave the road towards describing everything in this direction, and that is why not only is important to have the tests available online as a description, but that's where the role of the long-term aggregators come into place, which is like, well, at some point this test was described and this was the identifier, right? So even if I get a report from a tool from 5 years ago and the tool is no longer, it has been discontinued since, I still can understand what is it that was measured then. and that's my my maybe ending remark.
Thanks, Daniel. We are just over the 11:30. One last thing I'd like to ask everybody to do, if you haven't done it already, to either fill in the questionnaire or to look at the spreadsheet and fill in for whatever community that you wish, the questions that are asked. It would be really good to get some more information in on that spreadsheet. We did very well in the first workshop. We did okay the second workshop, and I'd really like to make sure that we've got some very useful information from these questions. There's a lot of very interesting chat going on, and I think that's going to probably give us a lot of input for the reporting. But I think would be very, very useful if you can complete the questionnaires or fill in a bit more in the shared spreadsheet. I'd like to thank Daniel, Robert, and Mary for their help in presenting each of the topics for discussion. I hope this has been interesting for everyone. I've certainly found it interesting. It's gone off in slightly different directions, which has been great. And there's been interesting discussions that have come on and some very useful comments from everybody. It's very clear that we are still actually quite away from where we would like to be in terms of fair assessment. And I think there's a lot of discussion still going on about what it means for both those who are researchers and those who are supporting them as well. Is there any comments from Maaike or Sarah?
No, yeah, I've tried to capture a combination of what's been said and the chat. So especially for the people who've spoken on mic, make sure to check in the notes if I've captured you accurately. And feel free in the notes to add anything that's missing or anything that pops into your mind later. And we will use everything together from the chat to everything in the document and the spreadsheet to come up with the final conclusions and recommendations. So as long as it's in some of those places, then we will take it into account. So make sure you check it's all there. And especially if there's links, make sure they're in the spreadsheet.
Thanks, Maaike. Any last question, comments, more about the session rather than a particular topic? Thank you, everyone. It was a very interesting session again. This will be the last of the Fair Impact sessions. On the metrics, we have many more coming up in the next couple of weeks. Please attend some of those. They're really interesting as well, well worth visiting and joining those sessions as well. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.